Let's start with third base because I don't know if there was a position.
We're going to keep Justin Steele here as long as we possibly can.
That's right. This is called a tease, Justin. He's in the podcasting world now. He knows.
Yeah, he knows.
It's about teasing.
Yeah.
Let's start with third base because I'm not sure there was a more important position on the Cubs roster going into 2024. Been trying to find that person since Chris Bryant. They moved on from Chris Bryant, and they've been trying to fill that spot ever since. You know, Wisdom's had a shot there. Madrigal's had a shot there. Master Boney's had a shot there. And they decided, as an organization, we're going to put Christopher Morel there. The best thing for this organization would be is if Christopher Morel can lay off sliders and he can figure out third base. If we can give him an everyday position and have that powerful bat that can lay off that bad pitch every once in a while, that will be the thing that really catapults this team. If we can get a star player at third and he's our best shot at it. I think it was the right move. It didn't work out. And then they made the trade for Paredes, and that might work out in the long term.
But we're talking about 2024.
We're talking about 2024. This is not a Jed Hoyer report card. This is a third base report card. And so for third base, I personally thought about doing something in the D range just because Morel owns the White Sox. And he did it, homered again. But that's one game, and I can't. So I had to give third base an F. The experiment was, without question, a failure, an F. And that doesn't mean I don't like Christopher Morel. That doesn't mean I don't think he's a very likable player. It seems like he's a very nice young man. I rooted for him. I cheered for him. But if you're asking me the grade for third base for the Cubs this year, there could not be a bigger F on the team. Third base was a huge problem.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. That Morel obviously played the first 4 months of the season, right, going to the trade deadline. Like third base was basically his job every day. And I know earlier in the season there were a lot more like defensive replacements at the end of games and stuff. Like Madrigal would go in and like late, like in the 8th inning or whatever, play the last 2 innings on defense, which is kind of a sign of like they still weren't ready to give him the shot, the everyday job at third base. Still don't necessarily believe in his defense there. There was so long where just the underlying numbers, the expected numbers, they were so good, and you're like, this can't just continue, man. Like the Megan Montemurro, she was here Monday. She said the same thing. Like there was a whole large portion of the season where you're like, this guy's getting screwed. Yeah. He's hitting the hell out of the ball. Like his numbers should be better.
He was statistically the most unluckiest player in baseball for like the first 2 months of the year.
Which
not defensively, offensively.
Yeah, which matters. I think it did matter, but like it got to a point where the results just weren't showing up, and those things we talked about, like his improvements in plate discipline, his walk rate was higher, his strikeout rate was way lower. Like they didn't completely go back to their pre-2024 levels, but they were starting to go back in those directions. Right? Like the strikeout rate was getting higher over like the middle couple months of the season. The walk rate was getting a little bit lower. I feel like you started seeing a little bit more of the tendencies he used to have as far as his plate discipline. I don't think it got to a bad point, but maybe a little bit of going back to some old habits, on occasion. To the point where it just like at the end of the day, by the time they traded him, the numbers just were never there. They just didn't get there, and then defensively, I think there were points where maybe you saw improvements, but it wasn't enough to where you really felt comfortable with him at third base. So Morel, what I was saying, the offense just didn't get to a point where you felt good about the numbers. The defense just never got to a point where you felt good about the defense. Obviously, they traded him for what they hope was some more stability in Isaac Paredes. Justin's eating breakfast, so we're good.
He's here.
And then you bring in Isaac Paredes, who I still think could be a good player. He's been a good player for a few years now, but just his 2 months with the Cubs didn't produce either. And he had struggles in like June, starting like at some time in June. Like he had been a few weeks of struggles even when they did trade for him, and those seem to extend into the last 2 months of the season. So while I do think he could be a good player for the Cubs, I did like the trade. He's got 2 or 3 more years of team control, and maybe he's the third baseman for the next few years for him, and a productive third baseman at that. I still believe in that, but that's, as we've talked about, like that's a long-term, a future thing.
Right.
But it's kind of, you come down to what do they do in 2024? Morel didn't produce enough to the point where you needed him to the first 4 months of the year. Isaac Paredes didn't produce in the last 2 months after they brought him in. Maybe being traded in midseason and going through the stresses of being traded or potentially being traded affected him. But in the end, he didn't. He just didn't. He just didn't produce. I think overall the third base position didn't produce this season. Weren't very good. It's got to be an F for me as well.
Okay. FF. The question before we get to Cody.
It's about time y'all gave some Fs. That way when everyone on social media yells at y'all too.
Well, it's still not going to make Godfather happy.
No, Godfather.
Godfather might be. He might actually like me for more so now. I've been given a lot of Fs of late.
There's no real answer to this, but I am curious if you think when Morel was doing the right things at the plate, but statistically the unluckiest player in all of baseball, had he not been unlucky in that stretch, just some of the balls start to squeak through and he gets base hits, is there a world where you think the unluckiness ruined him offensively for the Cubs? Like the experiment was ruined right there. Like, is it as simple as if he'd been a little more lucky early in the season when he was doing things the right way, may he have never gone back to his bad habits, chasing the slider, going outside of the strike zone, and we're sitting here having a completely different conversation just because he was unlucky and then couldn't help himself and went back to his old habits.
I mean, I don't know.
It's hard to speak for him.
No, I don't know.
For me, I hate to say it because I was such a fan. I think I'm not the only one.
Everybody's a fan.
Everyone loved Morel, and when they traded him, it was
the power was real too. Like the raw power
was there, and
something that the Cubs don't have necessarily throughout the lineup. Obviously,
like a lot of people have given me crap because I thought Morel could be a star. It was like, well, he hit 26 homers and was one of the best hitters on the team in 2023.
Yeah.
He had took a massive step in just year 2 of his first full season with the Cubs, and he was 24 years old. And I wouldn't say he was a top-tier prospect in the organization. Maybe he was in their top 30 at one point whenever the organization was, not necessarily as healthy as it is now. But to me, I wouldn't say he was a diamond in the rough, but he definitely wasn't like, he was never a top 100 prospect in baseball, right?
He was never Brennan Davis, PCA.
Right. He came up from
Double-A
when they called him up, right?
So,
because they had lost so many
to see the steps that he had taken in 2023 compared to how he ended 2022, which was not good at all, I had a lot of optimism. I think it's okay to have some optimism about a young player. So I wanted to say that before I give this grade, because I think anyone has listened to this show over the 2.5, 3 years that we've done it, I've been Christopher Morel's biggest fan in terms of believing that he could have turned into that star player the Cubs needed desperately. And, it just didn't work out, man. And whether, you can only use that he was the most unluckiest player in baseball for so long. I don't get it. Baseball is stupid, whatever. But at the end of the day, not even just offensively. I mean, he was statistically the worst defensive third baseman out there. I defended him early on in April at the position because it was April, and it just didn't really get any better. I think the routine plays got better as the season went a little bit went along. But I mean, he still finished like minus 11 outs above average, at least with the Cubs at third base. And, I think that if they would have been able to find a position for him, they would have been more likely to keep him. But the fact that they had played him all over the field and maybe second base was probably the only position that he could have played and been competent at, I guess. But you had Nico Horner there, whether defensively, Horner probably better than him. Is Morel long-term going to be the better hitter than Horner? I think there's still question there. And I think Horner had proven at that point that was his spot, and they weren't going to just trade Horner to play Morel at second base, especially with the season that he was having.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think in some aspects, the fact that the defense, he was focusing so much on defense, trying to earn that spot there, it did affect his offense. It's not an excuse, but I do think that played a part. So, yeah, I mean, it was bad. I did not envision this type of season for him at all, man. Like, I brought up his game log from just with the Cubs this year, and 421 plate appearances.
Mm-hmm.
He hit 199 with a 302 on base and a 373 slug with a 92 WRC plus. His K rate was 24%, which was significantly lower, like we talked about. His K rate in 2023 was over 30%. He cut it down to 24%, and he walked it over 11% of the time too.
Yeah.
So what we're saying about the improvements that he did make, they're there in terms of the K rate and the walk rate. But he just, 18 homers somehow led the team. But and like we said,
point,
he had raw power, but it just didn't produce enough. They put him in the 4-hole. I don't know if I should blame Counsell for that or not, but with that raw power, that's a bat that needs to be in the middle of the order somewhere. They moved him down to the 6-hole at some point. That still didn't help. I don't think it really mattered where he hit in the order last season. It just did not work out for him. And then, with Paredes, I'm someone, and I said this the other day, it's not that I don't like the trade. I understand the trade. To be able to flip a guy like Morel who struggled that bad and get a guy who had multiple years of control. He's only 25 years old. Was an all-star player.
Looks like he'll provide more stability or a little more certainty
Right.
to the position than what Morel was getting.
And even though I think the defense wasn't necessarily impressive either, and Luke, you have not shut up about that, it is better than Morel's
some
defense.
3-air games.
There was one.
Okay.
Okay.
There was a 3-air game.
One game where he did that. Okay. Not that I'm saying that it's excusable, but I'm just saying it was one game. All right. It's still better than what Morel's giving you. He at least made all the routine plays, right? It still was bad though. Like his second half with the Cubs, 223, 325 on base. He slugged 307. That's worse than Morel. All right. And he had an 86 WRC plus with the Cubs in the second half. His K rate's low, 17%. Walk rate around the same as what Morel's was. And only 3 homers though. And it's a position you need power from, and this team needs power. So I know a lot of fans questions about Paredes. When the trade happened, a lot of people questioned if he'd be able to hit at Wrigley Field, and because he's a straight pull hitter. All his home runs that he's ever hit were straight to left field at Tropicana Field. And that he hit better on the road than he did at Wrigley. I don't have the numbers up, but there's no doubt in my mind that he hit better on the road than he did at Wrigley. And I think that's something that fans at least have the right to question how to feel about Paredes going into his first full season with the Cubs. So on top of them two, and I'm just going to say this just because I'm so over having to talk about him, Nick Madrigal had a minus 0.7 Fangraphs WAR. He was absolutely atrocious at third base this year, on top of the fact that I've had to continue to find a way to have some sort of hope that things would work out. He was all terrible this year. He didn't help third base at all either. And I won't even go into all those numbers. It's just the Fangraphs WAR alone says everything. So, yeah, third base gets an F, man. I don't know how you cannot give. I don't know how you can't give third base an F. It's just what it is, man. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to go into 2025 with some optimism about Paredes.
Yeah, I think you can be optimistic about Paredes.
And I just said what I said.
2024.
Yeah.
And I just said what I said about Madrigal. But if he is your backup third baseman, a bench guy, as much as I really am ready to just see Shaw at least play that utility role, as much as I'm ready for that at the very least, I just don't want to see Madrigal starting on a consistent basis on this team ever again.
No,
I
think we're all kind of in agreement on this, obviously, with our grades, but
Yeah.
I think we all feel like we feel optimistic that Paredes will be more productive than he was in the 2 months of the Cubs next season, provide some stability, some more certainty to that position. He's a former All-Star. He has been good for a few years now, especially down in Tampa. So, like, I have some confidence in him that he's going to be good for the Cubs. Like, maybe Morel breaks out with the Rays, right? He didn't do it in his 2 months with the Rays. Maybe he does too. But I do still feel confident that Paredes is going to be there and have a good Cubs career, however long it lasts, right? I think he's controllable. He's not on a long-term expensive deal, and he probably has someone. Like I said, I have some confidence that he'll provide a little more stability and certainty to that position.
If Morel can't figure it out with the Rays, then I will openly admit that if there is one player that I've ever been more wrong about, it will be Christopher Morel.
I hope he does well. Speaking of Tampa, did you see the roof was ripped off the Trop in the hurricane last night? The roof was ripped off the building.
Yeah. Someone tagged me in a tweet related to it.
I have two friends that moved down there 2 years ago. One in Sarasota, and he got out on Sunday with his family, and the other is in Tampa. I haven't heard from him today, but last night they were taking on heavy water. So it's going to be bad.
And they were using the Trop as a staging for first responders, so that's not great.
No, and then you watch Anderson Cooper standing out there. Get this guy.
Hey, Ginger Z's down there. Give her a break.
Why? Get out of the hurricane. It doesn't help me.
She needs to show the viewers. You're a former weather person.
I am. I don't need the weather person standing underneath a building saying it's windy and raining. We can see the pictures. Anyway,
before we move on to Justin Steele,
because he's waiting patiently.
I'm assuming there's been a lot of chats related to, like, we should have never played Morel at third base.
I don't agree with that,
and I agree. I don't think that they really had no choice given what Craig Counsell was given for the roster. Now, should they have continued to play Morel at third base as long as they did? Probably not. But I think you had to at least give him the run for a couple months, because if they played him at third base, it gave you the roster flexibility. And it allowed them to be able to call up PCA when they did.
The bigger problem is having a question mark like Morel at third and having Madrigal be the backup plan.
Yeah.
That's the bigger problem. Yeah. There was no backup plan.
We all silly like the mayor.